Enjoy background footage of Pokemon FireRed version in this video while I rant for 7 minutes about Pokemon Day, Pokemon Presents, and Pokemon Ports, the main topic of this video. Let's get into it. Ports of earlier Pokemon games on the Switch are finally here. Well, sort of. They've been announced, they're on pre-order, and I think someone leaked some information, which means they had to announce it a little bit ahead of Pokemon Day, so that happened. Also, to just kind of address the obvious, Red, Blue, Yellow, Gold, Silver, and Crystal were already released on the 3DS Virtual Console years ago, so this video will not be covering those. But I will be covering a little bit of history. So, just to start things off, Pokemon Red and Green were the first Pokemon games to be released on February 27th, 1996, on the original Game Boy. There were some problems with Pokemon Green, so it was worked on and updated to be Pokemon Blue. At least that's what I heard anyway. Someone correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Eventually, the West got an international release of both Pokemon Red and Blue versions, and that is what many players and fans of the franchise know them as today. And anyways, eventually time passed, technology slightly evolved, hardware limitations were slightly less of a problem in 2004 than they were in 1996, and Pokemon Red and Green, or Pokemon Red and Blue, depending on how you want to look at it, slowly became a thing of the past, and the franchise was well on its way to moving on to the next era after its Game Boy Color games. Similar to how Pokemon content creators nowadays, and have been for the last decade, moving on from one mainline Pokemon game to another after the newest mainline is released. I remember when I joined the community around the time that Omega and Ruby and Alpha Sapphire was kind of dying out and Sun and Moon was about to come out. And then everyone abandoned Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire and then moved on to Sun and Moon. Eventually Ultra Sun and Moon came out, and then that happened. And then whatever came out after Ultra Sun and Moon, I think it was the Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee games, because they were the first ones on the Switch, happened. And then we were in the Switch era after Sword and Shield, officially came out. Obviously, we had the 2018 Let's Go Eevee Pikachu games, but that's a whole other situation. Anyways, as far as when games were released, we're talking about Fire Red and Leaf Green today. They were released in 2004. And I will say, I do think it's very fitting, but very also interesting that we're getting the enhanced Kanto remakes of, the Gen 3 era for the 30th anniversary. I will say, I hope that we get some news about Ruby and Sapphire. It doesn't have to be later this week for Pokemon Day, but I do know that Fire Red and Leaf Green do have a side quest in the Sevi Islands to get to the Ruby and Sapphire gems, so that you can help Celio to connect the wireless to be compatible with Ruby and Sapphire games. And according to the eShop pre-order information, the game is still supposed to have this because it's running as the original GBA games would, so there's really no reason for them to take it out, especially if it's basically just the same game but merely digitally available on the Switch as an eShop purchase or pre-order. So it's only logical that they eventually add Ruby and Sapphire to the eShop as well, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I will say that I'm kind of interested in the fact that, I know it's Fire Red and Leaf Green that they're releasing, but you would think that because they know about the side quest, they would have plans to potentially release Ruby and Sapphire as well. So I haven't heard anything about that. So maybe only the Fire Red and Leaf Green stuff was leaked. It would be nice for them to also release Ruby and Sapphire on Pokemon Day as well. But, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon because they have to take some time to get Ruby and Sapphire onto the Switch first. I will say it wouldn't make sense not to have them, though. Although I will say also that I do have very low expectations for Pokemon Presents these days, and I'm sure at least 12 and a half minutes will be dedicated to Generation 10, Pokemon Champions, Pokemon TCG Pocket, regular Pokemon TCG paper play stuff, something about competitive, maybe something about Pokemon Worlds or Pokemon XP or whatever that's called, Pokemon Masters, and Pokemon Go related content. And maybe something about a mystery gift code for Legends ZA, or possibly a Terra raid for Scarlet and Violet if they're still doing those. I have no clue, but I guess we'll see soon because we only have about 4 days left at the time that I'm recording this. I also will say that considering that Nintendo Switch Online Game Boy Advance is a thing, people may have initially thought that Fire Red and Leaf Green was going to be on that service. However, it seems like if it might be easier to have Pokemon Home connectivity as the games are digital download via the eShop, kind of like the Virtual Console games were for the 3DS, it actually might make a little more sense to do it that way. And I will say the US eShop pre-order price is about $20 for either Fire Red or Leaf Green, so if you're planning on getting both, it'll be about $40 total. I don't know if a Pokemon player will get both on the same console because that may seem counterproductive, especially with trade evolutions coming back in full force yet again, but who knows. I will say that if you want to buy both, you can. If you don't want to buy both, you don't have to. If you don't want to buy either, you don't have to either. It's $20 to $40. It's your money. Spend it however you want. So, anyways, I did want to say that if millennials in their mid-30s and Gen Z folk in their later 20s did experience Fire Red and Leaf Green on the Game Boy Advance when they were younger, this could very well be a worthy nostalgic purchase for them. I mean, personally for myself, I did purchase the Yu-Gi-Oh! Early Days collection because I liked those Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance games, and then some of them weren't even available for, outside of Japan. So they did do some translations and they got those, and that was fun. And I was able to enjoy those, and I'm glad that there's like 14 games on there. But you would think that maybe like Game Freak would probably do something like that. I mean, I'd probably pay $30 for, games on like a compilation cartridge from Pokemon, but I'm sure they want to do like the eShop variants for the foreseeable future because they've been doing that since 2016, it seems. Anyways, moving forward here, I did want to say that the target audience for Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green nowadays being ported to the Switch is, like I said, people in that generational bracket, or possibly kids of parents who like the franchise and they want them to be fans and stuff, and possibly have parental controls and share a Nintendo Switch for the household and stuff like that. I have no idea what they do, but it's possible that they could do that if they really wanted to. And honestly, the parents are probably very well aware it's nostalgia bait, but if they want to have their kids experience Fire Red and Leaf Green for the first time, I say let them. I say it's kind of harsh and rude to judge people for having fun for a game that's 22 years old. So I understand the criticisms, I do, but I also think that some people need to chill out a little bit, go enjoy a nice walk out in the park or something, and maybe I don't know, maybe play some Pokemon Go while you're outside. Maybe get some Pokestops and get some of those weekly challenges in those weekly challenge groups taken care of or something. I don't know. I'm just saying that at the end of the day, while $20 might seem outrageous for one 22-year-old game that's digitally ported to the Nintendo Switch, the Pokemon community has found something to fight about constantly ever since 2019. And after 7 years of it, I'm tired. People should not be telling people to quit having fun. People should just be left alone in peace. People should be allowed to enjoy their hobbies or their favorite pastimes. And nobody should be bullying anybody out of liking video games. That's all. I'll see you guys next time. And as always, stay safe.